hope. If it's gonna work, I'm gonna send it, and if not, next time. So I started recording. Excellent. Good. So let's start with what did I build so far. So the lecture is based on my experience from a few things. First of all, I was a freelancer, and I was preparing business plans for more than 4 years. A lot of those business plans got investment, and it gave me a lot of experience in seeing so many different business models. So that was pretty interesting. We're going to speak about freelancing, by the way, as a way to bootstrap. I'm also a blogger and a podcaster at Become Nomad. It's a blog and podcast about the nomadic lifestyle. I'm going to share a little bit about it as well. I started LingoLearn.com. It's an online language school that has hundreds or actually thousands of students currently, and an online cash flow business. And I also started StartupBlink.com, which is a tech startup and a research ecosystem research center. So basically, it's too many things. Don't do too many things. You should only do one, by the way. This is my biggest lesson, and I'm also going to adjust the PowerPoint as we go. That's basically a little bit of my experience. And speaking a little bit about the personal side to it, the nomadic side to it. So basically what I'm living a digital nomad lifestyle, which my blog and podcast can be seen at becomenomad.com. Let me actually share a quick link on the chat to the blog. And oops, wrong one, just a second. I'm going to go to the chat. So this is basically the link to the blog and the podcast. And the idea over there is that what I'm basically doing is that I'm switching locations every 2 months since 2010. And that basically means that I was traveling in more than 60 countries. I lived in more than 40. When I say lived in more than 40 countries, I mean at least 1.5 months. And I'm just switching between locations to see the world before it all ends. It's a complicated lifestyle. It's not recommended for all of you. It's a very interesting lifestyle as well. I use a few routines to make sure that I'm not totally going insane and keep on working, because as you see, I have a lot of projects to do. One of my major thing, or maybe my stable anchor routine, is co-working. And I totally recommend co-working to all of you as a way to just be productive and happier. We're going to speak about co-working because we actually have a nice offer for you on co-working. But the idea over here on the nomadic lifestyle, and basically I'm not going to go too much into it because we don't have a lot of time, so you can go to becomenomad.com and listen to the podcast and the blog. But the idea is that startups, actually founding a startup allows you to work remotely and create something new. So it's like startups are a total mess, very difficult, very, very challenging. There is a reason of why 95% of them fail. However, they give you a lot of freedom and it's fun. And that's what I also, as a side note, recommend to all you founders. Have fun as you work on your startups or your projects, because there is a good chance that they're not going to be around in about a year or two. And if you're going to be miserable and stressed while you work on your projects, then it's a little bit of a shame, right? So enjoy the road in a way. The road is more important than the destination. So that's basically a little bit on Become Nomad. And let's see if we can actually switch to the next slide and check LingoLearn. Tool, you created a WhatsApp chat, so that's pretty cool. That's great. So now a little bit about LingoLearn. Now, LingoLearn is a classic bootstrapped business. So what you see here is basically a landing page that is basically LingoLearn. LingoLearn now has currently thousands of students, about 50 teachers. We teach languages online. And the idea is that LingoLearn was pretty easy to start. And that's a classic bootstrap business for this reason. What did we do? We basically built a landing page with a form of leave your details, and then started converting people into buying packages of online lessons with teachers. And now we're working with big organizations, with governments and so on, universities, and also B2C. So it's a pretty, let's say, fun business that takes a lot of time, but generates some nice money. And basically, yeah, that's the idea. And we're going to talk a little bit about the lessons from LingoLearn. Because they're very, very relevant to bootstrapping. So LingoLearn's bootstrapping story. Basically, we started LingoLearn with $5,000 of investment. Today, $1,000 would have been enough. And this is the great thing about what's happening in startups recently. It's getting cheaper to start startups by the minute. The things that cost us $5,000 would cost us about 15 years ago at least 50,000 to do the same things, and today it would cost 1,000. So it gets on being cheaper and cheaper to start, which is amazing. Now, what we did on LingoLearn, and I think the biggest important thing on LingoLearn that you can take on your startup is that we adjusted a model that works in another market. So we actually saw people, we said, okay, online language lessons, will they sell? Yes or no? And we checked in other markets, like in the United States and so on, and we saw that people are selling them. So we basically took a model, customized it, tweaked it a little bit, adjusted it to our own market in Israel, and we knew it was going to work because people in other countries were buying it. And this is maybe a crucial point about having a startup. The biggest problem that you're going to have in a startup is if there's demand for what you're building. So if you have a way that validates that there is demand for what you're building by other people from other countries, it's going to give you a giant push and going to greatly improve your survival rates. And that's what we did on LingoLearn. Now, in LingoLearn, we're two co-founders that we stayed together for 7 years. And this is super, super important. We're going to have a section about finding the right co-founder. The technology on LingoLearn is a basic, what I showed you before, a landing page. And that's basically it. There is no more technology. We basically outsource everything else. We do the lessons on WebEx, a Cisco platform, and so on and so on. So the idea is that it was very, very easy to start, and we just focused on finding amazing teachers and building materials, but not more. Like all the technology and everything was outsourced from other places, and this is important. By the way, a fun story. When we started LingoLearn, we basically said, my co-founder and myself, we didn't have technical skills. So we said we must find a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer. We found someone. We waited 6 months before we started. We found someone. And this person actually quit on us 1 day after he started with us. And he said, I don't see the hope here for the startups and so on and so on. And what I want to tell you is that we, as a mindset, as a startup, always think about the CTO. It's so critical. We can't start with CTO. But him quitting on us was the best thing that happened to LingoLearn, because LingoLearn doesn't really need a CTO. It's basically a marketing operation and a teaching operation. So you don't always 100% need a CTO, although everyone tells you CTO is critical. It's not true. In many, many cases, you don't really need a technical co-founder. So that's important to remember. And if you have any questions, again, you can always chat. This is one more important thing about LingoLearn that is important to say, that basically we had our first student, our paying client, in the first month. And this is a critical fact for a bootstrap startup, and something that you should think about as well. We did take a small loan in LingoLearn only after we had some sales and we validated the business model. We took a loan so we can scale it to a level from having 10 students to hundreds of students and then to thousands of students. We're going to talk a little bit about loans later on. We tried to get investors, but we realized that it's not a startup, meaning that investors are more interested in very technological businesses and not so much in operational businesses, although they have good cash flow. So this is something that you should also think about when you're trying to get investors. Is your business investor oriented or not? Because if not, you're going to spend a lot of time for absolutely nothing. We started in 2010. We broke even in 2013. And this is important to say. Startups are not profitable. The more innovation ingredient you have, they're not profitable for an average of about 3 years. And this is something you have to make sure that you understand. This is critical. Startups are losing money in the first years of operation, almost always. That's why they shut down in 95%. We actually found our first investor to LingoLearn in 2015. The investor was actually one of our contacts. So the idea is that In this case, the investor actually came to us, and that's pretty interesting to note. And this happens a lot in startups that are kind of stabilizing. And the big conclusion for LingoLearn, by the way, is that it's daily grind for years, and the success comes late. You just show up every day, and you work, and you work, and you work, and this is the bootstrap way. You just show up and work every day for years, and hoping that something good happens. So that was a quick introduction about the first bootstrapping story that I was involved in, and I think there are a few really good lessons here that might also apply to you. Now, Dinesh is asking us if did we advertise? So in the beginning, we didn't, and this is pretty important. We to get the first paying client, we did a lot of work on our own, like trying to spread the word, send the link to our friends, and so on. Do organic, worked a lot on organic. The problem is, and the problem, by the way, intensified greatly, is that Google ads and Facebook ads are now incredibly expensive. In 2010, when we started LingoLearn, they were relatively cheap. Now everyone is in this game, and this is a bidding game. So I recommend in the beginning not to go into the paid advertisements until you kind of feel that you have a good business model. And only then you can actually go on the paid advertising. Currently, paid advertising is a great chunk of our expenses, and this is the way to get clients, but only after you actually stabilize the good business model. So that's kind of a lesson. Okay, so we're switching now to StartupBlink. StartupBlink is my second startup. And basically, this is not a bootstrap startup, okay? So, and it's important to say it because you can see the difference between LingoLearn and StartupBlink and kind of figure out if you can actually bootstrap or not. So StartupBlink is the wrong startup to bootstrap. Basically, I'm going to give you a quick overview about StartupBlink. It's a global startup ecosystem map and research center of startup ecosystems. And basically, it got a lot of press. You can see here all the logos. We got a little bit of help in the beginning from Guy Kawasaki as well that helped promoting this. And top government officials are now using it as a resource, like Canada's Minister of Science here that is quoting our ecosystem report. Basically, StartupLink is kind of a mess and a giant mess of startup ecosystems. We have, it's a combination, by the way, between technology, this map that we've been building for years now, data, tens of thousands of people who register on the map, startups, co-working spaces, accelerators, and so on. And I totally encourage you, by the way, to add your startup to StartupLink. It's free, and it's going to help us basically research your local startup ecosystem better. I'm even going to share a link, a quick link to StartupLink. It's on the chat, just a second. It would be great if you can add it as well. And basically, we're connected. We have the technology, we have the data. A few months ago, we added another branch to it, which is basically a research branch of researching startup ecosystems around the world and ranking all of them. We're going to speak a little bit about that as well. And the last thing about StartupLink is basically it's also a community place where we have about 80 chapters right now all over the world. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this also in the future. So that's basically the idea. And I mentioned the big innovation that we had about a few months ago. This basically the ranking for startup ecosystem. We basically ranked 1,000 cities and more than 125 countries according to their startup ecosystem strength based on our data. Why is it important for you? It's important for you, and by the way, you can see those rankings on StartupLink. You just scroll below the map, you're going to see giant rankings of countries and cities. You can switch between them to see where your country and city is located. And the idea over here is simple. Where you are building your startup is critical for your success. First of all, if you're not bootstrapping and you're looking for investors, you have to be in the top startup ecosystems. It's nearly suicide to try to raise investment if you're in the wrong place. However, also if you're bootstrapping, it has great importance to be in a good startup ecosystem. And basically, this is a lesson that I've learned the hard way. And the idea is that leveraging a good startup ecosystem will give a lot of boost to your startup. There is a reason why the best startups in the world are in San Francisco, New York, Tel Aviv, Berlin, and London. People there are not smarter. What happens is that basically the network allows you to be more successful with your startup. So it's pretty critical to be in a good ecosystem, also if you're bootstrapping. And this is something that I didn't understand before, and I understand it now. Our basic advice in StartupBlink, by the way, is if your ecosystem, your city, basically, that's your ecosystem, is not good, either consider leaving it to another city where you're going to have better networks, better chances of meeting clients, co-founders, and so on, or become a leader of your local startup ecosystem and lead it. And this is relatively easy if your city is kind of dormant on startup activity. And by the way, this is one more thing that we're doing in StartupBlink with our chapters. We have over 80 chapters around the world. And if you're interested in leading your startup ecosystem via StartupBlink, here's a quick link to our community leaders program. Moving on to a few of the biggest lessons that we've learned on StartupBlink in everything that has to do with bootstrapping. So the idea over here on StartupBlink is that StartupBlink is a global startup ecosystem map. It's a giant vision. And remember this because we're trying to now answer the question, should you look for investors or can you bootstrap? So, okay, giant vision. What happened with StartupBlink is that we realized that this is not a bootstrap business. We had to raise investment. Until now, we raised about 150K investment, which is not a lot, by the way, in startup in invested startups. And we actually put about $20,000 of our own, the co-founders. I'm currently the only co-founder that is active. All the others are on investor phase. And this is another thing that I want you to remember. This is incredibly important. There is a very good chance that your co-founders are not going to be active in your startup in a year, in half a year, or especially in 2 or 3 years. Take this into account because those things are super fluid. Everything that has to do with co-founders, lives change, people change, and so on, goals change. So you have to make this into account if you go on the co-founders path to make sure that you understand that there is very, very high probability that you're going to be on your own or you're going to quit, by the way, in a year or even less than a year. And people don't realize it, and it creates a lot of problems in the future. So this is something to remember. Now, a few more things about StartupBlink. I want to remember this because, again, we're trying to answer the question, should you bootstrap or should you go for investors? So StartupBlink had no validated business model when we started. And generally, this is a bad idea also for invested startups, but especially for bootstrap startup. And there was no clear pain and no clear solution. We're like thinking, hey, let's build a cool startup ecosystem app and so on and so on. And this is a really, really bad idea. Not to have a pain and not to have a solution and building cool platforms is something that you want to avoid. And I'm sharing our lessons here. Currently, by the way, what we're doing, and this is only after a few years of trial and error, we currently understood that our main point of strength, and this, again, pivoting, lots of understanding, and what we're doing now is basically open innovation. We're connecting corporates with startups, big corporates usually, with startups, and I know that one of you is currently building, and we're doing also startup ecosystem consulting to governments, municipalities, and so on and so on. I know that one of you is building an IoT or hardware startup, so I'm going to share a link to one of our partners, which are basically, their name is ANSYS, and they're doing software simulation tools to build really, really cool virtual prototypes. Probably not relevant for all of you, but this is for anyone here that is doing hardware startups. Side note, hardware startups are incredibly difficult. They're like the toughest thing that I've seen because startups in general are difficult, but hardware startups are kind of, you have to build a prototype and you have to manufacture a prototype, and so many things can go wrong. So it's absolutely astonishing for me that people are trying to do hardware startups. I'm totally a fan of everyone who is taking the risk on IoT, wearables, hardware, and so on and so on. This program can help because one of the things is basically building a prototype is super complicated, and you have great set of tools here to do it. Now, what is the conclusion for StartupBlink? The conclusion for StartupBlink is that it's not recommended to bootstrap this kind of a project, okay? Because you've seen, the vision is huge. We're not sure about how to make money when we started. We're not, there is so much uncertainty here that this is a business that you should only start when you are going for investors. That's basically the idea. The idea is that when you're trying to build a StartupBlink, you're going to need investors. However, if you're trying to build a LingoLearn, like we saw before, you don't need investors. And one of the biggest advice I can give you is to have a deep look on your project and kind of think, is my project a LingoLearn or StartupBlink? And if it's a LingoLearn, you can probably do it on your own with a little bit of self-investment of time and money. If it's a StartupBlink type of a project, forget bootstrapping. You're probably going to need to raise investment. So it's very, very important to understand what you're doing. Okay, and this is critical. I wish I would know this a long time ago. It would save me a lot of time, efforts, and so on and so on. Yeah, I'll jump to see if there are any questions. And so Roberto is asking, what if it's a little bit of both? Roberto, it's always a little bit of both, but you're just going to have to decide if it's more of this kind or this. There is no clear bootstrapping project or investment project. However, if you see that investment is needed in the short term and you will not be able to reach your goals without investment, you probably need to focus a lot of your time on raising investment. It's not going to happen by bootstrapping. So basically, that's the idea. By the way, what you're talking about, Roberto, the online courses and building a community, I have a feeling you can do it on bootstrapping, especially since community projects are not so appealing for investors. Investors are not that much into community projects. So from what you told me now, it seems like it's more of a bootstrap project. That's good news that you can basically do it in as a bootstrap project. Okay, a little bit about bootstrapping. We have a few famous bootstrappers. So GitHub, MailChimp, 37 Signals, TechCrunch, all of them actually raised money, but on their terms, on a longer after they actually reached a few goals. And by the way, I told you about LingoLearn, our investor. In the beginning, we tried to get investors. It didn't work. We ran the business, starting to generate cash flow and profitability, and then the investors are coming. So the idea is that you are in a much better position if they come to you instead of you searching for them. It's like dating in a way, that if you're desperate, it's very clear that you're desperate. So the idea is to build yourself, to build the best image possible, and it's easier then. And this is a very interesting point that I want to talk about, the second point. There are many more startups that have never raised money, never, ever, conquered a niche, and generate great income for their owners, and they're never in the news. And this is a dream startup. So basically a niche-focused startup that generates really nice chunk of money, that sustains you, and it's not making you a super millionaire, but sustains you well. Nobody knows about you, and you're free to do as much as you want. This is the dream. This is the bootstrapping dream. And something that I hope that some of you can achieve. Others of you are aiming higher to big startups that are changing the world and so on and so on. But that means that bootstrapping is probably not the way for you. Okay, let's move on to... Okay, Santi is asking about can an aggregator type of business can be bootstrap or it needs an investor? Usually those types of businesses require an investor. Aggregators are difficult. They're very comprehensive. But you have to think about it as well. Just a quick note about investment. This is not the topic for today, but just for you to know, you can't really go to investors without showing them a lot of milestones achieved. So in any case, the bottom line is that you have to work, work, work. However, with investors, you also have to dedicate a big chunk of your time to actually making the connections and reaching out to investors. So that's kind of a drag, because we're going to speak about this a little bit later. Okay, now the big question, is bootstrapping for me? This is a big question again, because it totally changes the way that you are focused on your startup and the activities that you're doing. So here are a few questions. Again, it's never black or white. It's always somewhere in the middle, and you're going to have to figure out where in the middle is your startup. So here are a few questions to ask. Basically, bootstrapping means that you can do it on your own. So here are the questions. Is it a cash flow operation, targeting a specific niche, or a startup that will change the world? Okay, so if it's a niche and a cash flow operation, bootstrap. If it's a startup that you aim to change the world with, not bootstrap. You will not be able to build a Facebook without investors. Okay, so if you have really, really high aspirations to change the world, not bootstrap. Is there a clear, validated business model, direct competitors who make money from the same model? Remember I told you about LingoLearn? We saw that in the United States, someone actually managed to pull it off. And then we said, okay, we can probably pull it off in a local market and then expand to other places. The idea is that if you don't have proof that people need what you sell, it means that you're going to have to spend time and money discovering and pivoting. Pivoting costs money, a lot of money. And the bootstrap startup cannot continuously pivot. So the idea is that if you're not sure that what you have actually sells, and by I mean sure, I don't say assume or think. I mean you have proof that what you offer is actually what people are buying, bootstrapping is not a good idea, because it's going to take you time to reach the market. A few more questions. Is there a clear pain that you're solving? Remember I told you about StartupBlink, a cool startup ecosystem platform, no clear pain. If there is no clear pain, what does it mean? You're far away from money, from revenue. And that means, again, not bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is all about getting to money as soon as possible. One more question that is very, very important. Can you start selling now? Remember I told you about LingoLearn? We started selling in the first month. You know when we started selling in StartupBlink? After about 3 years. So the idea is that if you can start selling now, you might be able to bootstrap, not sure. But if you can't sell right now, you need investors. And the last question is, do you have the skills to do most of the work yourself? Because today in startups, most of the expenses are actually on salaries, okay? So the idea is that if you can't build it on your own and you have to hire other people, on your own, I mean it's either you or your team members, then probably bootstrapping is not for you. And the conclusion over here is that sometimes if you're not close to the market, investors are a must. You can't avoid investors. So that's important to say. Okay. So Sachin, this question is a little bit too tactical. I'm gonna need more information. So send me an email, and I'll try to answer it on an email. Okay, why is bootstrapping becoming popular? For a few reasons. First of all, launching a startup is a lot less expensive than ever. So basically, if you would start a startup about 15 years ago, Dropbox did not exist. You had to pay like $50,000 on servers. Skype is now existing, and we can do webinars and calls from far away. Plugins for WordPress, outsourced platforms like Upwork. Crazy stuff that totally diminish the expenses that you need to spend to build a startup. One more thing that is very helpful is the Lean Startup MVP methodology, minimum viable product. And the idea over here is that you don't launch something perfect. You just launch something out there to test if there is demand. And with this mindset, a very minimalistic mindset, you can actually launch a lot faster and with much lower costs. Meaning we don't build this giant thing and launch it when it's ready. We launch it before it's ready. We're going to speak a little bit about that. And I'm going to speak now about a little bit for you guys that are and girls that are looking for investors. Why don't you want investors? There's a good reason of why you shouldn't be in a situation to want investors. And I'm going to share a few horror stories here. So basically, raising money is a full-time job, and you have to be aware of it. If you're going on the path of raising investment and you think you can do it as a side thing, forget about it. This is something that takes many, many months in most cases, and gets you totally out of focus. You won't be able to work on your product that much. You're going to be focused on sending emails and so on and so on, ups and downs. People are saying you come to a meeting, they don't even show up. Crazy stuff that is happening when you're looking for investors. It's an emotional roller coaster, and you're not going to work on your startup at this time. So that's important to say. Now, chances, if you're looking for investors, the chances are against you. And the investments, a sad fact about the world, there are more people that need money than people that want to give money. Okay, so this is something you should be aware of. And the idea over here is that basically, if you're going on the investor path, the chances are that you're not going to make it. Only about 5% of people who are looking for investment actually end up with investors as well. And that, especially if you don't know the right people. So investors are working on introductions and connections and so on and so on. If you're doing only cold emails and stuff like that, it's very unlikely that you're going to get investors. Investors is all about feedback loops from connections. So if you're not well connected, investment is probably not your thing. If you have investors, you have to keep on reporting to them. You can't make really good decision-making without consulting them and so on and so on. They might not be fun to work with. They have equity of the firm. That means that you have to take them into account, and you have partners. You're not free. Okay, so that's something to think about. In some cases, you can get fired, especially with venture capital investors. Sometimes too much money is distracting. I'm going to give you a scenario. Someone now gives you $500,000 to work on your startup. You're working on your startup, and if you wouldn't have this $500,000, you would close it because you don't have money to continue. Someone gave it to you. It allowed you to work on your startup for 3 more years, okay? And basically what happened is that you wasted 3 more years of your life just to run out of money. And the idea is that sometimes investment is creating some kind of, let's say, a fake situation that you're wasting time, because the best money there is money from clients and not investors. That shows you that you're really solving a pain. So sometimes investment is not that good. And the last thing that I want to tell you is that, and this is important to understand about professional investors, is that professional investors are working with a strategy called spray and pray. And basically, they're choosing those who can become unicorns, valued in more than $1 billion. So the idea over here is that, let's say you started the startup and you got investors, and now the startup is making $50,000 of profit a month. And you're super happy, your investors are not going to be happy. They're going to continuously push you into reaching more and more money because they didn't come into your project because of $50,000 a monthly profit. So it means that in a dream scenario for you, you can't even stop. You have to keep on running, might burn yourself in the process, just to make sure that you get them those returns. So many, many reasons to actually think if you're looking for investors. Bootstrapping is pretty cool, like we said. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about something that I believe in. It's called the subsidy model. This is for you bootstrappers. Let's say you decided, so now we're at the part that you're convinced that you're not going for investors, or you're convinced that at least you want to try bootstrapping. So the subsidy model is as following. The main assumption over here, and we talked about it, is that startups include trial and error, which makes most of the startups not profitable in the first few years. Okay, so I totally recommend, if you're taking the path of bootstrapping, to understand that your startup is going to lose money for a few years. And the idea over here is simple, the subsidy model. So the subsidy model for bootstrappers is following. Always have a profitable layer that sustains your startup, okay? Always have something that makes money, so when you work on the startup, this thing feeds oxygen to your startup. I honestly think that this is the only way to start a startup. You need something profitable before you start a startup, unless you have a lot of savings. So the idea is to build the profitable channel or layer first before you start your startup, okay? Let me give you an example for me. Okay, what did I do? So basically, I worked as an accountant in companies before I started the startup path. So I had a little bit of initial savings. And by the way, savings are very, very important when you start a startup because you need a little bit of oxygen. But the initial savings were not enough. So I also started freelancing at the same time. And I told you that I did business plans for clients and so on and so on. So with those initial savings and the freelancing, I sustained LingoLearn. Okay, basically the subsidy model was money from initial savings plus money from freelancing, and then I could build LingoLearn. And then basically I stopped freelancing when LingoLearn became profitable, and I used LingoLearn, which now became the new subsidy layer for StartupBlink. So the idea is always try to have an operation that is making money before you start the next uncertain thing. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting model that I recommend everyone to think about. And again, if there are any questions, feel free. Okay, moving on to bootstrapping sources. A few of the sources that will allow you to start your startup without investors. So none of them is fun, by the way. This is a big thing. None of them is easy and fun. So the first option to do is actually to fund it from your own savings, or as we said, subsidize it with your own profitable layer and so on. The second one is to get a loan. You can get a grant. You can use crowdfunding. We're going to talk about all those things. You can use resources from incubators and accelerators. And the best thing, but very, very difficult, is to start selling from day one to sustain the operation. But this is extremely difficult, and most people will not be able to do that. So that's why you need the other things that are mentioned here in the bullets. Okay, this graph is very important because it actually shows you what is the current situation on bootstrapping, okay? And basically, the idea is as following. From all the big talk on venture capital and angel investors and whatever, you see this column, the orange column, which basically says that most people fund their startups with their own personal savings and credit. And this is extremely important to remember. This is how startups are born and sustained in the beginning from your own money. Okay, this is the big one. After that, you see family and friends, which is something that a lot of people make jokes of, but family and friends are considered to be an amazing source of investment, and they're the easiest investors to get. And only after that, you can see venture capital, angel investors. Look how small it is in the total pie, and so on. So crowdfunding is incredibly small. So just remember this, that most people actually use their own personal savings to build their startup. And this is something that is a little bit disappointing, but that's the way it works. A little bit of advice about family and friends, because those are, as I mentioned before, investors that are easy to persuade. You should be extremely careful with raising money from family and friends. What I do and what I recommend doing in case that you are going to family and friends is doing the following. Two things. One is to tell them that the statistics are that only 5% of startups survive. So they have to know the statistics. You can tell them, I'm going to do the maximum. I'm totally committed to this. I have a really good feeling about this, but they should know the general statistics is 5 to 10% of success. Okay, that's the first thing you should do. The second thing you should do with family and friends, so you don't have really awkward dinners in 10 years with your uncle after they lost all their money, is to make sure that they can afford to lose that money. So let's say if your uncle has $50,000 in the bank and they want to give you $20,000, don't take it, because this is a giant portion of their savings, and it's going to affect their quality of life if you lose it. But if they have $5 million in the bank and they want to give you $10,000, then take it, because it doesn't make that much difference. If you're going to lose it, it's not going to be a giant disappointment. So those are my two quick advice for family and friends. Let's talk a little bit about self-funding, using your own money to fund your startup. So if you believe in your startup, it's a very good idea to put some of your savings in the initial operations. I think it's critical. I don't know anyone that actually started a startup without putting a little bit of money. And if you feel like you don't want to put your own money in your startup, probably not start it. That's basically my advice. So why is self-funding important? First of all, it creates self-commitment because you create some kind of a sunk cost. You say to yourself, okay, I actually put $5,000 of my money in the startup, so I'm moving forward, although I had a really bad day. It's also signaling your commitment to potential co-founders and investors that you're going to go to and you're going to tell them, hey, I didn't have even $2,000 to invest in this thing. They'll say, no, you don't have skin in the game. I don't want to invest in you because you're not committed to your own startup. And it allows you to start right now, which is important because it's all about executing. So let's talk a little bit about self-funding solutions. What can you do to fund your startup from your own money? So some jobs allow you to work while building an MVP on the same time. Let's say, for example, a night guard in a building and so on. You can do night shifts and actually sometimes work on your own projects and so on. And I know a lot of people that did it. So try to find a work that is not 100% focus, but maybe per cases and so on. And then you can actually work on your startup while working as well. It's not optimal, but it's doable. And a lot of people are doing that. One more thing that you want to consider is to freelance and do consulting in your field of expertise. And you can either get jobs from your network or you can use freelancing platforms. Upwork, for example, is the one that I used a lot. So that's something to consider. Now let's talk a little bit about, I see that I have a few questions here in the QA. Actually didn't look at the QA, I only look at the chat. Raul is asking, how did I target my first customer at LingoLearn and validated it? I just did, we showed up on Google, people left us their phone number, we called, and we sold. And that's the best thing to do. You actually see if reality comes with your expectation. And Shivam is asking, what are the sources of freelancing other than Upwork freelancers? Currently, there is a new one called HubStuff that you might want to check that is pretty interesting. But other than that, Upwork is pretty much dominating the market, I have to admit. And I only worked on Upwork, so I don't have a lot of other advice here. Let's talk a little bit about loans. Don't take loans. If you can avoid loans, don't take loans. However, sometimes they're needed. What I want to tell you a little bit of advice about loans in general is that avoid loans if you haven't proved that you can sell. So don't take loans on the phase that you're not sure if there is product market fit. Loans are basically only done to scale after you actually generate the first sales and you see a lot of potential. Don't take loans in an environment of uncertainty. That's one thing. Now, the second thing, just like the advice I gave you on family and friends, make sure that you can actually repay the loan if something goes wrong, okay? So, because chances are against you on loans, on startups in general, you're gonna have to repay that loan, so make sure you're not taking too much. And one of the most important things is to also cap your loss, which means that you're deciding that, hey, I'm taking a loan of $5,000, but that's it. Like there is no way I'm making more of it. And that's critical because it's easy to sometimes keep on taking loans. In Asia, by the way, I think that most banks are not so happy to make loans, but in Europe and in the United States and places like that, it's very easy to take loans. They actually try to give you more and more loans as much as they can because then they kind of own you. You have to be super, super careful about this and cap your losses at some point. Now, a little bit of advice about loans. If you do take loans, try to arrive to the bank prepared with the business plans, although they will care most than anything about what if things go wrong, what can you give them? If you have a house on your name and so on and so on, again, you have to be super careful. Shop around. Banks are like a market. You can actually shop around and get better interest rates and so on and so on. And try to get deals from banks that have to do with student loans and so on, because those have a special interest rate. So that's for loans, not recommended. Okay, grants, a little bit about grants. I don't have a lot of experience in grants. A lot of people actually do the initial investment of their startup with grants, so it's worthwhile to check this avenue. Grants are usually from governments, but also from corporations, universities, nonprofits, and so on. Usually they don't require you to give any equity to anyone, which is super great. However, grants take a lot of time to secure and a lot of bureaucracy as well, and forms and so on. So you have to take into account this thing and actually plunge into it. So grants are an interesting source, but not as easy. It's going to take a lot of your time. It resembles a little bit to investors. Now, accelerators. Accelerators are great. Usually those are programs of 1 to 3 months where you actually go to a place, you work from there, you get connected to a network. Pretty cool. I think it's a good model. They give you mentors. Some of them are actually offering you some money in exchange to a little bit of equity. So that's a good option. However, I have to tell you, the best accelerators are not for bootstrappers, meaning, for example, the best one in the world, the most known one is Y Combinator. Y Combinator is not going to accept a bootstrap mentality startup because Y Combinator and other top accelerators, they're going for unicorns. So if you're into bootstrapping, accelerators are probably not that much for you because you will not get accepted. Basically, accelerators are trying to find the startups that can become multi-billion businesses. And if you're into the mentality of bootstrapping, probably the top guys are no longer relevant and the other guys are not with such good quality. So you have to do a lot of due diligence before you dedicate the time, especially if you give equity, and try not to give equity, by the way. So that's the accelerators, an interesting option, but sometimes not that good. The other option that is now becoming hot and cold all the time is crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is interesting. By the way, you remember the graph? The graph actually showed that crowdfunding is a very, very small portion of total startup investment. So you can't really count on it. The idea in crowdfunding, it's like platforms like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and so on, is to create a viral campaign and get funded by the public. There are a few good advantage to crowdfunding, which is basically you don't need to give up equity, you don't need a business plan, nobody does due diligence on you. And it's actually, I think the biggest advantage of crowdfunding is it makes you articulate what you're trying to build. So you're like working on your pitch, you're working on the reasons, on the goals, and so on, and it makes a lot more things organized in your head because you have to present it to the public. And crowdfunding actually allows you to test if there is demand for your product. And this is actually the death of most startups is because there is no demand. So crowdfunding allows you to check if there is demand or not. So that's a pretty cool option to do. Disadvantages of crowdfunding that you have to take into account, it takes a lot of time and money to prepare crowdfunding campaigns. So you have to take this into account. You have to get the traffic to the campaigns yourself. Nobody's going to bring traffic your way. If you don't have the network and the marketing tools to actually get the traffic, probably not going to work. Most startups are not suitable for crowdfunding. We did a crowdfunding campaign in StartupBlink. It didn't work. Usually the startups that fund themselves in crowdfunding campaigns are building hardware products, physical product that people want to receive by mail. Okay, so if you're building SaaS, software as service, and so on, it's not relevant for crowdfunding. Very low chances of success, so it's not worth your time. And many things actually, let's say, promise a lot of things in crowdfunding campaigns that when they have to deliver, and you have to deliver because you have like 1,000 people that are like, why are you sending me my product? Why does it take so long? They see that actually what they didn't price it well, it costs a lot more money, or it can be very difficult to manufacture. So crowdfunding can create a lot of stress. However, regardless, it's a very interesting model to think about, especially if you're doing something physical. Okay, I'm moving on to a tip that I have for you that you remember until now we talked about where to get the money to your startup. One more thing that you can do that is worthwhile is to reduce your personal costs. And by the way, one of the reasons of why I'm having a nomadic lifestyle is that I'm trying to find places that are cheaper. So the idea is go live somewhere that is cheaper, that is also a startup hub, a really good combination between a cheap place and also a startup hub that you can connect to people. I think Roberto is probably in Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is a great example for a cheap location that is also a great startup hub. And so reduce personal cost, that's important. And on a personal level, when you work on a startup, you have to work Pareto. And working Pareto means that you put 20% of your time on 80% of the value. Okay, this is critical. You can't be a perfectionist when you work on a startup. So forget about perfectionism. And the last thing on the personal cost cut is say goodbye to your ego, because you're going to be poor for a great amount of time. Now we're going to talk, we talked about reducing business costs. Let's talk a little bit, we talked about reducing personal costs. Let's move a little bit to reducing business costs. So on the business costs, what I offer you is the following advice. First of all, leverage on other things. Let's say if you're building a LingoLearn, which is online lessons, work on finding the best teachers and the best teaching materials, but don't build CRMs and don't build virtual classrooms. The idea is whatever you can outsource from other places, outsource. Only focus on your own specific expertise. And this is critical because you don't have the resources to reinvent accounting systems and CRM and so on and so on. Only work on your thing and outsource everything, like use existing solutions. I also recommend use freelancing platforms to hire. I used to work a lot in Upwork. Now I hire a lot in Upwork, so it's like a wheel. But the idea is that if you hire people from low-cost locations, like, for example, India or South America, you save a lot of cost in comparison of hiring people with the same talent from the United States. So use those platforms as well. I usually recommend delaying to form a legal entity. There are many, many cases in which you have to build a legal entity. However, if you're in the idea phase and it's only starting out and so on, you don't really need to register a company. You can start, and then when you actually generate some revenue, only then think about the registration. And what I also recommend is to do most of the PR and the initial marketing. We talked about don't go to Google and start spending thousands of dollars there. I would probably not also hire a marketing agency, and you have a lot of them with a monthly retainer of about $600, $700. In the beginning, try to get the quick wins. And there are many, many ways of getting quick wins. For example, you can submit your project to hundreds of directories that are online to get SEO benefits. Try to do guest post exchanges. So actually you get valuable links in places and so on and so on. Approach startup magazines and so on. So the idea is that there are a few cost-effective ways of doing the same work that actually cost thousands of dollars on marketing if you're starting to heavily use Facebook, Google, and marketing agencies. So in the initial phase, you have to figure out how to get the first few quick wins on your own. And speaking about quick wins, we actually have a quick win product for you that we've developed on StartupBlink that does exactly that: submissions on directories and so on, and articles on our blog and SEO benefits and so on. So I'm going to share a link for that as well. You can check it out. It's called Marketing Blast, and it's a one-time payment to get all those benefits, so something that is worthwhile. A lot of the things that we're doing, you can do actually on your own. They're only going to require a lot of time and expertise, but they're doable. So if you're totally without budget, check what we're doing in the Marketing Blast and do it on your own without using us. But the idea is not to start working with marketing agencies in the initial phase. It doesn't make any sense. Let's move on to the next slide. I'll actually check in the chat if we have any comments. We're okay. Okay, so we talked about reducing your business costs, and now we're moving on to the last few slides of this presentation. Basically, push to the market is probably the best advice I can give you, and the idea over here is push to the market. So instead of going for investors, try that your clients are going to be your investors, that your clients are going to fund you. And how do you do that? So we talked about a few of the things you can do. I'm just going to repeat a few of them. Even if your product is not near completion, how can you sell now? This is a question that each and every one of you that is bootstrapping should ask themselves. How do I sell this month? Usually, in order to sell this month, you're going to have to build some kind of a hybrid between your final product that will be ready in about 4 months and consulting. So I'm just saying that this is an important thing to think about. The other things you want to do is develop an MVP, minimum viable product, and to test demand. Don't work on stealth mode on a product that is 100% ready. Nobody cares, and you have to validate if there is demand. So first of all, just launch something out there and hope that people will complain. What's happening? Basically, if you're launching an MVP, something that is a skeleton, if people don't care, nobody talks to you about this product, you know that you have a demand problem. And then even if you would launch a giant product that is ready, it wouldn't work because there is no pain. However, if you launch an MVP and people are telling you, whoa, you're launching this thing and you don't even teach Spanish, are you crazy? This is a really, really good sign that you have to continue developing. But the idea is connect to the market, get feedback from the market, and this is why the minimum viable product methodology is critical. One more thing is say yes, it will be fine. If there is a big B2B client that comes your way and tells you, you know what, I'm going to give you a big deal. We had this in LingoLearn. Say yes. You have to be super, super confident, especially with B2B clients. So you get very, very few chances. Be confident and say yes. Don't be shy. Hustle well. Be creative. This is also important. Find a story that will get you traction. For example, I found the digital nomad story, which is good. I got a lot of publicity in various magazines on this story. People like stories. So try to find a story. If you don't have a story, you're going to have to pay Google and Facebook. So try to find a story and keep going, keep grinding and take the dip. There is a book by Seth Godin called The Dip. And basically it means that you just go and show up to work every day without giving up. Okay, that's sad, but this is the only way to do it. No easy solutions here. A few words on finding the right co-founder, and co-founders are critical because salaries are almost always the most heavy expense in a startup. So since you're the first founder, the first person to join your startup, try building something that aligns to your skills. So if you're a coder, don't start a physical product. This doesn't make sense. Use your own skills, and that's important. Like, because salaries again are the most important thing. If you can do a lot of the things on your own, it's critical. You want to find team members that are not like you. So if you're a marketing person, you will be drawn to other marketing people, but that's not the people you need. You probably need a salesperson or a developer and so on, or an accountant. Depends on what you're building. So the idea is try to find people that complete you, because those people are going to save you salaries. And that's exactly what you do when you bootstrap. You don't want to pay salaries. And the last tip on co-founders is basically have an agreement, because we talked about this. People will constantly quit. You'll be surprised, constantly quit. And that means that if you have a good agreement, it's gonna preserve your friendship. There is a saying in Italian, clear agreement, good friendship. If you don't have a good co-founder agreement, then stuff happens and you don't know what to do. Not you, not your partner, and so on. So it's gonna affect your friendship. It's gonna affect your startup. Have a good co-founder agreement. Let me see if there are any additional questions before we... so you is asking about a recording. I'm going to try to figure out. It's recording. I'm going to have to check. I'm not sure we have enough cloud. I didn't prepare for this, but hopefully there will be a recording. And thank you to Shash that is giving us good feedback about the presentation. Okay, 2 last slides and we're done. We can go have coffee. The last thing I have to tell you, or the 2 last slides are basically, actually it's 3 slides. Don't work alone. So the idea is as following. What you're building multiplied by your network is the final result. So let's say you're building an amazing product, but you don't know anyone. It's going to be very hard to get result. At the same time, let's say you know everyone, Richard Branson, Tim Ferriss, all the big guys, and you're building something that has low value, it's going to be multiplied by zero results. So the idea is work on a good product and at the same time have a network. And those 2 things are critical. It's really multiplication of those 2 things to get the final result. And that means that you have to pick the right startup ecosystem. If you're not sure, go to StartupBlink. There is a big table there, and it's going to show you where your city at. If it's low, consider leaving or leading, as we talked about before. Go to events, build your local network. It's important. The people you know are critical, not today, but tomorrow. And those are the co-founders, those are the team members, those are the future clients, those might even be the investors. So your network is critical. Do not shut yourself from external feedback. I know that we have someone working on a stealth project here. Stealth mode is for rich people. So it's great if you're rich, but if you're not rich, you can't afford to go on stealth mode and not... The idea of startups and bootstrapping is to constantly tell about your startup to everyone who is willing to listen to you. And there are not going to be a lot of people willing to listen to you. So the idea is do not do stealth mode unless you have money. and surround yourself with entrepreneurs. And over here, I'm specifically talking about co-working. For me, as a digital nomad that is traveling between locations, if the co-working concept would not exist, I would probably not do it. Co-working is critical for me. Before I check if there is accommodation in the place, because there is always accommodation in the city, I check the co-working options. And if there is no co-working, I'm not going there. So basically, co-working is critical for many, many reasons. I've actually did co-working in more than 40 countries, so I'm pretty proud of that. I found clients in co-working spaces. You can find investors in co-working spaces. I found co-founders in co-working spaces. Co-working spaces are great for networking. Working from home leads to entrepreneur loneliness. I'm currently at home and I feel depressed already. So totally, if you do it for many, many days, working from home, you're going to shut down. And entrepreneurship loneliness is something that is documented and happens. You will not be able to avoid it in a way. There is a certain thing that entrepreneurs need connection to other people like anyone else. So basically, that's it. It increases productivity. It does cost money, but you get it in the high productivity that you get when you actually see people around you working. It gets you in the right mode. And it's easy access to knowledge and to events. Basically, if you have networking in a co-working space, you can always go and ask people, hey, how do I do that? How do I do that? And it's amazing the opportunities out there. So basically, co-working is something that I totally recommend. We just actually started a partnership today with WeWork. WeWork is the biggest co-working network out there. And basically, if you're looking for investors and top quality people, WeWork is the place to go. I'm going to share a link with you that actually gives a discount, specific discount to the attendees of the webinar on WeWork. So I totally recommend checking it out. You can't go wrong with WeWork, by the way. They're amazing and impressive. So, but if there is WeWork in about 50 cities now in the world, probably in your city as well. If not, find a smaller co-working chain. There are many, many options for co-working, but WeWork is pretty good. I've done all of them, and I enjoy the small ones and the networks as well. So that's pretty cool. And the last slide for today. So this is the WeWork partnership. Check it out. And the last slide for today is going to be about when to kill your startup. This is the sad slide. I don't know why I do it the last slide. It's a really sad topic, but let's talk about it because it's also important to know when to kill your startup. So the funny thing is that many of the startups are zombies, which means that they're alive, but they're actually dead. The scary thing is that from the people here, probably some of you have zombie startups. It's possible that I have zombie startups as well. So we never know. The scary thing about zombies, they're sneaky. And the idea over here is that they're dead or they should be dead. Okay, so how do you know if your startup is a zombie? And that's a really, really tough one. So if your startup is very far away from product market fit, which means that selling is not easy, if there is no clear way of covering your costs and generating the revenue that you need, if people are not excited about it, and especially if you're not excited about it, there is a good chance that it's a zombie, and that means that, zombie, you shoot zombies and you move on to the next thing. So that's basically the zombie tip. And yeah, that's basically it for today. My email, eli@startupblink.com. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. We're going to send you an email with all the links that we've discussed today. Add your startup to startupblink.com. Our Twitter is @startupblink. And yeah, that's basically it. We actually, wow, that was long. I have to short it next time. So that's basically it. So yeah, basically, because I think most of you have to go, send me questions via email, and we'll reconnect. So anyone that has questions, just shoot an email my way. And great, thank you very much for coming. We're going to do those webinars once a month, so stay tuned. It's always going to be about another topic and so on, about investors and co-founders and so on. So hopefully it was valuable for you. And thank you all. Thank you all for arriving. Have a good one.